So I'm going to just say Ed Shortliffe is facilitating the next panel, and take it away, Ed.
This third panel, question we were asked to address was what new organizational structures would best enable historical libraries to fulfill their new roles, following on the morning's discussions. I want to just say that as someone who's not a full-time library person, I found today, but I'm a physician and a computer scientist, and I found that the discussion today was very eye-opening. I look forward to more of that in the rest of the discussion. You know, I actually did artificial intelligence research in medicine in the early 1970s. So as I listened to the discussion today, I felt a bit like a historical relic, if you will, having seen that growth and now the amazing impact and awareness of AI that was pretty much unknown in those early days. Our discussion today has two great speakers. Our first will be Jeff Reznick. He's the senior historian at the National Library of Medicine at NIH in Bethesda. And second is Babak Ashrafi, who's the founding director of the Consortium for the History of Science, Technology, and Medicine in Philadelphia. So I think what we'll do is let Jeff kick things off and continue in a moment.
Thanks, Ted. It's a privilege to be here. Press.
I think your slides were supposed to come up earlier. It didn't happen.
Can I get my slides?
Go back to your picture, and then after that, somebody should be inserting your slide deck.
So while we wait for my slides, let me just say it is a privilege to be here. It's especially an honor to bookend what was my presentation, very kindly mentioned by several of you in the 2013 College of Physicians conference, and also to have co-edited the proceedings of that conference with our great colleague, Dr. Michelle DeMeo. So Michelle, great to see you as always. So while these two conferences that you've heard about, the College of Physicians particularly, have a lot in common thematically, they are different in one important respect. This conference is geared toward developing executable recommendations to inform the future of historical medical libraries. What I'm going to do is speak to this practical expectation while raising some arguments and some ideas to spark some dialogue, debate, and creativity in thinking forward about structures which I think will enable historical medical libraries to fulfill their new roles. So much of what I'm going to say, the chords have been struck by the fantastic previous speakers, but I'm going to proceed in any case.
I think you can control the slides.
Okay.
I think.
Wait. You want me to wait? Okay, I'll wait, no problem. All right, so I'm just going to proceed, but I'll catch up with the slides. So whenever you wave your arm and let me know, and I'll be ready to jump in. All right, so here we are, 10 years, more than 10 years on from the College of Physicians Conference. Much has changed. Much has changed culturally, institutionally, technologically, and characteristic of change, some experienced by historical medical libraries has been expected, and some has been unexpected. Some change has been within our control, and some has been beyond our control, in some cases far beyond our control. But one thing has not changed: the persistence of historical medical libraries in themselves, in their various shapes and sizes, to the point of bringing us together again to address their future and their new and evolving roles in that future. So a decade to 15 years ago, thereabouts, marked an important beginning of historical medical libraries digitizing their holdings and placing them online for access and discovery. Today marks a time when we can really marvel, as we have done, at the available corpus of such materials, and no less the explosion of digital tools and methods available to explore these collections in their multiplicity of formats, physical and, of course, increasingly born digital. Tomorrow will certainly, most certainly, look a lot more like today than a decade ago, when even more collections will be online, more tools will be available to study them, and new generations of researchers working in virtual spaces increasingly expecting to find these collections and their related data online. And these younger generations will increasingly be trained to use new tools to study these collections. And certainly a segment of this audience represents that new generation. This future will undoubtedly have hallmarks of what I describe as our very complicated present. And again, you'll hear chords struck previously. We have an even more rapidly advancing technological ecosystem born from the eras of big data and data science and, of course, artificial intelligence. We have ever-increasing financial pressures on institutions of all shapes and sizes and commensurate expectations of demonstrating the reach and the impact of engagement, programs, and services. We have the task of providing services to stakeholders with varying interests and evolving interests and expectations of traditional institutions operating in the expanding digital age. And hallmarks of this future will also include challenges to interdisciplinary thinking and practice born from disparity in the appreciation of the disciplines, not least the robust and impressive rise of STEM, we've heard about this, and the, perhaps, I think, agree, unfortunate gradual fall of the humanities. We will also have issues involving reduced use of traditional physical workspaces and increased use of virtual spaces. Yes? Yes, I thought I gave it to you. Oh, okay. Oh, here we go. If you'd be kind enough to load that, that'd be great. It's the only one. It's in the top.
Explains the problem.
Real time. Thank you very much. Okay. So it's very helpful to delineate this, current climate, of course, but more helpful is acknowledging two fundamental facts about historical medical libraries as I see them. The first fact is that each historical medical library exists in its own ecosystem. And this has been mentioned before, but I want to really surface this point. They exist in their ecosystem retrospectively, presently, and prospectively. Thank you. Okay. Each stewards its own collections, each is rooted in its own heritage and mission, each provides and prioritizes services to its community and its stakeholders, each holds membership and partnerships and affiliations in support of its collections, its mission, and staff of subject matter experts, whether related to collections, finance, and fundraising, policy programs, or technology. And each, of course, has mission-adjacent associations with affiliated organizations. The second fact is that the collections of each historical medical library constitute patrimony, documenting the human condition across time and space with all of its complexity and all of its problems. We've heard about this, of course. This is patrimony which can prove important to research across multiple disciplines, as well as teaching, learning, and public service. So portions of these collections may be defined as legacy print collections, which absolutely deserve ongoing responsible assessment in our ever-expanding digital era. Other portions may be defined as unique or rare, and by these very definitions stand above and apart from other collections, and they deserve ongoing preservation and prioritized digitization, so current and future researchers and other patrons can benefit from their contents. So these two facts, ecosystem and patrimony, are especially important toward addressing the question of this panel, and I think the conference overall, and what is arguably, I think, the single most important goal for historical medical libraries, and that is connecting them to the current and future research ecosystem and ensuring that they remain connected. Here, I'm using current and future very, very deliberately, because even as we might be confident about understanding and defining the current research ecosystem, what questions are important, what challenges are most vital to overcome, etc., none of us can know the research ecosystem of tomorrow and how future generations might formulate their own research questions and face their own challenges. We can all agree that a decade ago, no one would have predicted with certainty that we would experience a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. And today, no one can predict with certainty what threats to public health we might face next year, 5 years from now, or decades from now, and what will be needed to undertake to address these threats. Admittedly, we can't know the future, but what we can know and can support are the collections of historical medical libraries as patrimony, as worthy of passing down from generation to generation. So this may be a very obvious statement, especially to the present company, but I think it needs to be stated. in response to some who might suggest that historical medical collections have little or no or very limited present research value. Such an argument is mistakenly presentist, even myopic. It's also unfair to generations to come who deserve to benefit from the collections amassed by previous generations who had their eye on this amassed knowledge being useful for their present and the future. By accepting the collections of historical medical libraries as patrimony, we are accepting and leaning into their future potential research value, as previous generations did. This future viewing of the collections of historical medical libraries can and should be a foundational strategy to realize the necessary future proofing of historical medical libraries so they remain and become even more useful to society while expanding their communities of stakeholders and users. So hand in hand with this strategy is recognizing and accepting the prevailing and unwavering character of the current and future research ecosystem. First, this ecosystem is undeniably expanding in the digital space. We've talked about this. Secondly, this ecosystem is increasingly defined by the principles and practices of open access, open science, and knowledge translation involving all disciplines, all toward promoting equitable and meaningful access to research for diverse communities. So by open access, very quickly, I'm referring to the definition, the UNESCO definition. I won't read it. By the definition of open science, I'm referring to that of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and I hope these definitions are familiar to all of you. These twin characteristics of the current and future research ecosystem require us to see and accept that digitization and unfettered access to historical medical collections in their physical digitized format and their born digital format, that this unfettered access is essential so these collections can continue to become part of this ecosystem, discoverable, usable, and useful, as opposed to being apart from this ecosystem, hidden, challenging to use, and not as useful as they have the potential to be for users and stakeholders who will increasingly expect to see them and use them in digital form. And I'm talking here about future users and stakeholders, beyond really all of us who are sitting here and those who are watching remotely. I'm talking about those who decades from now will be looking for historical medical libraries in the digital world, from wherever they are physically sitting, working, and researching. I'm arguing that the usefulness of historical medical libraries for research depends on thinking about and planning for these future stakeholders who will be working within and holding very high expectations of the digital space, with all of its complexity. We know that. Contributing to the acceleration of research progress and dissemination of its outputs, this trend of the current research ecosystem shows no sign of slowing down. And as ever more researchers embrace a digital mindset, and by extension expect libraries to embrace this mindset by making their valued collections accessible online while continuing to preserve them for the future. So as I've suggested, and others have suggested too, this mindset of patrons and institutions goes hand in hand with all parties becoming more technology and data literate, curious about using technology to create new ways of supporting research, as well as committed to continuous improvement, problem solving, and innovation, as well as robust, measurable, impactful external engagement. Because these are the hallmarks of the 21st century research ecosystem, they must also be the hallmark of the research institutions who contribute to and define this ecosystem. This includes and should not exclude historical medical libraries. Of course, technology cannot replace the profound physical experience of holding a unique collection item in your hand, or at least not yet, ref earlier conversation. The necessity of conserving and preserving the patrimony of historical medical libraries is absolutely necessary. So to a very certain degree moving forward, historical medical libraries must achieve this, what I call patrimonial coexistence in both the physical and the digital worlds in order to achieve new ways to deliver their collections and related products and services to their stakeholders. Such coexistence of historical medical libraries will necessarily evolve within the climate that I described and that we've all been discussing. It will ebb and it will flow according to the changing expectations of users and stakeholders. One important initiative which strikes the very chords of patrimonial coexistence and evolution is the recent report of the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation and the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is entitled Held in Trust. and according to its Associated News release, Held in Trust focuses on the intersection of conservation and preservation with critical areas of study, including environmental resilience, science and technology, inclusivity, equity, and collaboration in professional practice, education, philosophy, and ethics. It has many actionable steps that it articulates, and it's a great resource, I think, for historical medical libraries to help guide them in charting new roles in both digital and physical futures as part of their 21st century participation in the research ecosystem. Undoubtedly, along the way, some new roles will extend from the past, and they should, such as using collections to inform historical contexts of public health issues and related policy and programs, or to support the relationship between the medical humanities and medical education. And I'm speaking very broadly here, of course. Other new roles will grow from older ones fading away, or again, from circumstances we simply cannot know, or can certainly prepare for by positing the patrimony of historical medical libraries to be accessible and useful in the future. So in thinking about the future of historical medical libraries, issues of sustainability and growth are absolutely key, and they understandably differ from one library ecosystem to another. In this regard, I'd like to offer what I believe are some fundamental steps for any library to chart and grow into the future. I'm not going to read these steps, but for the sake of time, you can have a look here. And these are really hallmarks to what I think are some really key ways in which libraries can and should embrace going forward. Many of these are common sense, but I think because we're talking about executable recommendations here, I thought I would state the obvious. So at one point or another, every public-facing institution takes steps, or should take steps, to be responsible with the funding that it receives, responsible to and sustainable for its stakeholders and its users, and flexible in order to face and engage advances in technology and changing expectations of stakeholders and users. So every public-facing institution includes the National Library of Medicine, which, for those of you who do not know, is one of 5 in 27. I came up with this phrase the other day. So it was one of the 5 national libraries. It's also one of the 27 institutes that make up the National Institutes of Health on the main campus in Bethesda, Maryland. NLM operates in both respects based on authorization by Congress through the National Library of Medicine Act of 1956, which is mandated to do all the things that are listed here. And I'll let you have a look at this. So this is a very key piece of legislation that created the modern National Library of Medicine. In 2015 and 16, NLM leadership welcomed feedback to inform what emerged as its strategic plan for 2017 to 2027, which is entitled A Platform for Biomedical Discovery and Data-Powered Health. This is a framework which responds to changes in biomedical informatics and data science, precision medicine, open access to biomedical information in all of its forms, both contemporary and historical, changes in our country's health systems, and new directions and opportunities for scientific achievement. Subsequently, each NLM division has been developing and implementing a long-range plan to support the NLM strategic plan, as well as the broader strategic plan of the National Institutes of Health. The long-range plan for NLM's Division of Library Operations is known as the 2036 Long-Range Plan. And that plan resulted in a recent reorganization to achieve the 5 goals that are described here and advance our commitment to key functions which serve our users, namely collecting, curating, and connecting the world to scholarly biomedical literature, health information, and data resources. And this commitment, of course, includes NLM's globally appreciated historical collection, which spans 11 centuries and originates from nearly every part of the world. It's an invaluable resource for all of us and for all of you and for all of our users out there in the world. More broadly, this change at NLM reflects a hallmark of its nearly 190-year history in service to science and society. The library has continuously evolved as information management practices have changed and as technology has become an integral part of the way that we work and the way that our users work, and fundamentally influence the expectations of our users, of course. And these are users who, over time, have increasingly wanted information that they're seeking, collections they're using, with a click of a button from wherever they are and whatever format they're looking for. So, and even more broadly, this change at the NLM coincides, and it's an indicator of a lot of future thinking going on in various library ecosystems. And we've heard much about this, of course, and planning for the future library ecosystem. I think one of the best books to emerge from such thinking and planning is Sandra Hirsch's Library 2035. There's a lot more books, and I'll encourage everyone to read Trevor's work, of course, but I thought I would mention Sandra's book, Imagining the Next Generation of Libraries. It builds on Joseph James's book, Library 2020, Today's Leading Visionaries Describe Tomorrow's Library. So there's lots of resources out there, and these are just two among others that I think can be very, very helpful in discerning some key steps and ideas that can generate momentum for historical medical libraries moving into the future. So taken together, these various projects, more specifically, I want to mention two resources that are aligned with very important new trends in data-driven thinking about institutions and their resources and services. There are several initiatives which have yielded tools for the measurement of outcomes, the measurement of impact, particularly for academic libraries. And one of these is the American Library Association Project Outcome, which is also designed for public libraries. And then this is a book called Outcome Frameworks, which is probably about 15, maybe even 20 years old, but it's one of my favorite books about outcomes. So anyone have a favorite book about outcomes? I think so. All right, but it's by a great organization called the Rensselaerville Institute in upstate New York. They've moved on to do a lot of school assessment, but this Outcomes Frameworks book is really a phenomenal kind of primer in thinking about how you deliver programs and how you measure outcomes for those stakeholders. And I think it can apply to many different institutions. Okay, so all of this said, how to proceed? Well, a first step to me, and there's some key questions to address, is positioning. How do you position yourself to study the ecosystem of historical medical libraries and the trajectories of their associated organizations and institutions? How are we defining that ecosystem? How big is it? How many historical medical libraries are we talking about? What commonalities are there among the members? Where are there points of cooperation? Where are there points of disagreement? What initiatives could be undertaken to capitalize intellectually and financially on the unique and rare materials held by these institutions? And this might involve any number of the projects, such as Jeremy described, that are locally specific or regionally specific, or national projects, like the upcoming 250th anniversary of our country. Any number of projects can help to focus the mission of a historical medical library. Asking and answering these questions, among many others, can begin to achieve what I think is a future proofing of historical medical libraries. However, the most fundamental step in this positioning involves appreciating and accepting as valuable the patrimony of these institutions, and strategizing very deliberately to make this patrimony a part of the current and future digital research ecosystem, situating it where future generations will be looking for it and where they hopefully will find it. And appreciate that as they face their own research questions and their public health challenges, they could well benefit from this record of human experience of which we are all the stewards and we're passing forward. So I think that's a central tenet that I want to leave you with in my presentation. I thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you for the invitation to join you today. I've met a lot of people with whom I've only interacted online previously, and it's very nice to be in contact with the analog proxies for your digital presences. The Academy is a member of the Consortium for the History of Science, Technology, and Medicine. The consortium was originally started as the Philadelphia Area Center for the History of Science, founded in 2007, with 10 local collections as member institutions. A few years later, in 2009, someone from the Academy called, Janice Kaplan, who was the director of the library and the special collections at that time. We had a series of conversations and email exchanges that started being about how to start a New York area center for the history of science, and ended up being about how the Academy could become a member of an expanded version of our Philadelphia Center. We discussed it in Philly, and in the end we thought, New York, that's so far away. How would that even work? And we couldn't wrap our heads around it, so we declined to expand. 6 years later, we returned the Academy's call, and we've been delighted to be working with you ever since as part of the Consortium for the History of Science, Technology, and Medicine. The idea that the Academy planted has now grown into an organization with 38 member collections in 4 countries, and with thousands of participating scholars from 6 continents in our online programs. In the process to facilitate the growth and to adapt to the changes in our circumstances in Philadelphia, the Consortium has become an almost entirely online organization, to the point that we've just recently begun talking about how to reestablish our in-person presence corresponding with our new host institution, the Science History Institute, and how online modes and in-person modes of activity might complement each other. So I hope that sharing some of this story might contribute to this conversation about changing institutional structures for a collection-based organization in the digital age. It might contribute because we are a collection-based organization. It might be a bit of a stretch because as a corporate entity, we don't actually own any collections. We work with your collections. So to set the stage briefly, the Consortium was originally established as a collaborative fellowship program for collections located near each other and having significant overlaps in their holdings. Fellowship applicants send their applications by email, we printed them out, we made packets, and we delivered them often by hand to 3 readers who read all the applications and met to select the awardees. If they were really far away, like Princeton, they would have a conference call. Every fellow gave a small lunch seminar during their stay in Philly. I handed them their checks, stipend checks personally, often over lunch. We made a web page which had information about how to apply and had links to the catalogs of member institutions so that the applicants could tell us which collections they were applying to use. We held a monthly colloquium that moved around town at member institutions. We organized the occasional workshop or small conferences, all things you would expect. What else would we do? It went well. We had fellows who made important contributions and have gone on to productive careers at leading institutions like Melissa Graff. We held conferences that produced volumes in leading journals like Osiris, Scientific Masculinities, for example, edited by Erica Milam and Bob Nye, and also special editions of other leading journals. Our regional colloquium was well attended by local scholars, including many students from the University of Pennsylvania and the fellows of the organization that was then called the Chemical Heritage Foundation. So we were a new organization trying to find our niche alongside our member institutions, some of whom had large, terrific fellowship programs and seminar series of their own. We're trying to find the answers to crucial questions. What's our distinctive contribution? Who's our community? What's the value of institutional membership? These questions were, and still are, related to how we achieve long-term sustainability and establish a brand new donor base. Questions similar to these are not just for new organizations, of course, but persist throughout the lifetime of any institution. We developed our new programs. As we developed our new programs, it was natural for us, as it has been for all organizations since the late 1990s, to start employing digital and online strategies to solve specific problems. For example, we learned that it is unreasonable to expect any panel of 3 people on a selection committee, even distinguished and prolific scholars as we had, to be able to judge the appropriateness of project proposals to 10 collections. That's just too much, even if these collections are near each other and have significant overlap. It turns out, for example, and it was a surprise to our selection committee that year, that you should come to Philadelphia if you want to study sugar production and refining in the American South and the Caribbean. So we had to modify our fellowship selection process to include input from librarians, archivists, and curators from member institutions. In the same way, it is difficult for a few readers to evaluate applications from across a broad range of disciplines that would be appropriate to the collections, a broad range of disciplines on topics from history of art to history of physics, early modern Jewish midwives, irrigation techniques in medieval Afghanistan, 20th century Chinese textiles, and computer-based education in the Soviet Union. Where do you find a committee that can do that? So we needed yet more readers. As the number of readers grew, printing out applications, mailing them, was no longer possible for the numbers of us who worked at the institution. And then, how do you process about 700 reports from 70 to 90 readers each round? At the time, we had 1.6 employees. We're much larger now. We have 2.6 employees. How do we gather and convert all that data into fellowships twice a year? Well, you know the answer. Perfectly standard. Everything was moved online into a database, standard stuff. But now we had readers from across North America, Australia, and Europe, as well as applicants from those places, and eventually South America, South Asia, East Asia, and Africa. The reader students applied for fellowships, the readers applied for fellowships, our librarians applied for fellowships. The solution of our Philadelphia area-based problems propelled us into a global presence, small but global. We also learned that it was not reasonable to expect our fellowship applicants to know all about those collections in the consortium that held materials they should use for their projects. The applicants had to list collections for which they would like research support, but our consortium colleagues made it clear that these lists were incomplete. And that was our primary goal, to increase the use of member institutions' collections. So a small change in the application form made it easy for our consortium colleagues to suggest travel awards to collections that the applicants did not suggest. In recent years, about a quarter of our research trips that we have funded were not initially requested by the applicants. A side effect of this small change has been that we're now able to provide detailed feedback from librarians from multiple collections to the applicants, even if they receive no award. One applicant who didn't receive a fellowship recently, but who gave us a lot to work with, replied that the rejection letter he got was the most useful rejection letter he's ever received. One senior scholar who helps oversee our programs has said that she knows of no better way for scholars to collect feedback from librarians on their projects. We also produced an online search hub for the collections of member institutions. At first, we made our own solution. Actually, that was the outcome of a project I did at AIP when I was a postdoc there. They had lots of databases at the Center for History of Physics, and Spencer Wirth, the director, said, well, it's all there, but you can't find it because you don't know where to look. And we were doing a pilot project for digitizing their oral histories, and they needed to know where all the information about them was. And so Spencer got me SQL access to their back end, much to the alarm of the rest of the staff. And after a little while, it was clear that we could make what was later called a discovery layer for their collections. There's much better discovery layers produced now. We don't use our homebrew system anymore that you can get from university library systems and commercial vendors. So our online search hub offers more than 6 million catalog records of member institutions and 40,000 finding aids. And that turns out to be one of the things that prospective new members are most interested in. So a few years later, after the first call from the Academy, we started wondering if New York was really too far away, and maybe we could make an expanded membership work after all. After running some experiments and making some adjustments, we were ready to invite new member institutions not located anywhere near Philadelphia to join the consortium. So applying pretty common technologies to solve specific problems with our existing regional fellowship program created opportunities for us to more effectively and efficiently promote use of our members' collections, and then propelled us beyond our local home region. We experienced similar trajectories in other directions. I mentioned our monthly regional colloquium. In time, the novelty wore off and attendance declined. The scope and the breadth and the disparity of our fellows' topics was too broad in time period, in regional focus, in topical focus, to attract a dedicated repeat audience. Moving the meetings around town was fun, but also inconvenient and expensive. Other area organizations had the resources and constituency to much more easily produce a consistent series. Our roving regional colloquium was not a sustainable or distinctive contribution. But a fellowship program needs a place for the fellows to present their work, to promote their work, to get the best feedback possible. And a new organization needs ways to display publicly the value of our programs for member institutions, for a donor base which didn't yet exist, and for a broader public that did not know about or value the history of science or history more broadly. One foundation responded to our grant application by asking if we were a science organization or a humanities organization. One of our Philadelphia member institutions threatened to leave the consortium because it turns out they were monitoring attendance at our events, and their observations led them to conclude that we weren't having significant impact. So it wasn't enough to do good things. We had to find ways to make publicly visible the doing of good things. Not being able to hold large meetings with broad appeal, we tried holding lots of small meetings on specialized topics. In order to get the specialized expertise we needed back in 2010 or 2011, we Skyped people in to the meetings from across the US and Canada. We used different video conferencing technologies with mixed success, and the audience wasn't ready. We had one senior distinguished scholar from a top US research institution commenting on one of the papers, and at one point I said, do you want to turn your webcam on? And they responded, sure, what does it look like? That kind of problem doesn't exist in the post-pandemic era. Our total attendance in a year might have amounted to 500 people. And I was puzzled to observe that the series had a much larger visibility than the attendance might indicate. I met people around the country, like at the History of Science Society meeting in San Francisco a few years ago, who would make positive comments about our holding online series. And we had few enough meetings at the time that I actually attended every one, and I knew that the person speaking hadn't attended, but they had nice things to say about our little online seminars and went to the trouble to find me to say something. So maybe there was something worth building on. Our staff talked about each meeting after it concluded, and we developed reporting sheets for keeping a record of who attended, what the participants did, what worked at each meeting and what did not. We collected feedback and thought about how to improve the program. We built more features into our website to make running the meetings easier. We built features to track how meeting leaders prepared for the meetings and how they communicated with their participants. We wrote a handbook for meeting conveners about how to do things well, about best practices. We made an online system for monitoring when discussion papers were posted, notification emails sent, when downloads happened, and made sure things were done in a timely manner, herding all the cats, as it were. We encouraged participants to set up satellite meetings at other institutions, as Paul did here at the Academy. And we had a great little program that scholars appreciated, even if they didn't participate in it much. We developed an online seminar series because we realized that we could not sustain an in-person meeting series. And we had a sense that the participation could grow, and we're trying to figure out how to better promote the program. Then COVID hit. During the first summer of COVID, it was clear that everyone was going to put their seminars on Zoom. So first we had to switch from Big Blue Button to Zoom. Put all their seminars on Zoom along with their classes and their public events. I thought that our little but warmly regarded program would soon be swamped by the online events produced at the elite universities and lots of other organizations. But we had already built an infrastructure. We'd developed policies and best practices. We gained a lot of experience, and we'd fostered a small but very engaged online community. So we decided to make one big try at continuing in a much expanded pond with many, many big fish. We opened our program and offered our fellows and others in our community the opportunity to create their own online working groups. We got proposals for groups that I would have never thought of launching: Evolution and Heredity in Brazil, Medieval Sanskrit medical documents, manuscripts, History of Obstetrical Objects, Infectious Disease in the Islamic world. Attendance grew from hundreds to thousands. Emerging scholars got feedback from senior scholars who appreciated meeting young people, taking the fields in new directions. Scholars easily crossed disciplinary boundaries and found shared interests. Researchers who did not have colleagues in their topics nearby found an online intellectual community. They used the working groups to produce edited volumes, promote new subdisciplines, and to engage interlocutors from around the world. The program's next challenge was the post-COVID reopening, when in-person events resumed and many events remained hybrid. We did not know if the participants would switch back to in-person meetings as quickly as they had switched to online meetings. But the interest and engagement continued as COVID waned and in-person meetings resumed. Working group attendance did drop just after COVID, but in the 23-24 academic year, attendance once again reached the peak we had in the first year of COVID. Now, the reason we hold online meetings is no longer that we lack the space and audience to sustain in-person meetings. Our online program has found its community and has developed into a distinctive contribution to our field in its own right. That happened because we already had a technical and programmatic infrastructure, because an audience quickly emerged that was willing and capable of engaging online, and because the value of the program is no longer tied to the specific circumstances for its initial growth. That is, we had tried before, during, and after COVID to develop a program of online meetings that was more than just a series of online meetings. Nobody needs us to hold Zoom meetings, so there's some added value there. Our goal is not to hold online meetings, but to connect scholars with each other, and the value of that goal persists. The features of our programs, practices and policies, the choices and selections we make all along the way are intended to create more and better connections among scholars. As with the fellowship program, applying common technologies to solve specific problems with our existing programs created opportunities for us to more effectively and efficiently make connections among scholars and propelled us beyond our local home region. So this brief story about two of our programs, fellowships and working groups, it's incomplete and it might be misleading about the impact of technology. I think that the relationship between online technologies and the success of our fellowship program is similar to the relationship between other or older fellowship programs and the US Postal Service. In both cases, the fellowship programs would not be possible without the Postal Service or the internet. But they're not the cause of but the cause of the success of the fellowship program is not the Postal Service nor the internet. The success of the fellowship program is due to the richness of the collections, as well as the interest of a community of scholars who have the skills and the knowledge to find and use the collections to produce novel contributions to scholarship. In the early years of the Philadelphia Area Center, our success was due to the collections and stature of the founding organizations and the scholars in the region and across the country who wanted to and could use those collections productively. Even then, we weren't successful for several years, but benefited from the commitment of established leadership of the founding institutions who had the resources and the vision to keep us going. Those included Marty Levitt, the librarian of the American Philosophical Society, who introduced a whole bunch of innovations into the APS that continue to transform the organization. Pat McPherson, who was the executive officer of the APS and continues to serve on our board, and Ron Brashear, the librarian of the Science History Institute, who tolerated almost daily calls from me. Ron, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you do this? When other organizations like the Academy joined the Consortium, it was because they shared our goals of strengthening and expanding the connections of scholars to the collections here, and enriching the connections among scholars in the Academy's community. When some of the elite universities joined, it wasn't because they profited from the transaction. I'm not sure what they need from us or what we could do for them. It was because they shared in the broader cultural values we try to promote, saw our early success, and wanted to support those efforts and to be seen to support those efforts. We did not create the material, intellectual, and cultural conditions that made our success possible. And if those conditions had not existed, all of our clever use of technology would have been much less fruitful. Similar observations hold for the working groups program, as they do for the fellowships program. There was a long-standing perceived need to make more and better connections among scholars in our fields, especially those not resident at the elite institutions. As I said, even people who didn't participate appreciated the efforts that we made to meet this goal, meet this need. And when the need became acute and everyone went online during COVID, we were already ready to help meet the need. When the impact of COVID waned, the desire of fostering intellectual community continued, and participation in the online working groups continued. The Consortium has evolved from an organization modeled on very traditional local historical institutions into an online organization with sustained global engagement. This happened as we faced specific material problems with programs we wanted to build locally, and we found specific solutions to them, which were online solutions. These solutions opened up new opportunities for us. Pursuing these opportunities entailed making administrative, organizational, and institutional changes. How do we shepherd scores of application readers through the selection process twice a year? How do we process hundreds of readers' reports? How do we get our 100 working group conveners to send emails and share discussion papers in a timely way? How do we prevent copyright infringement on our website with hundreds of people uploading and sharing documents for discussion? We were fortunate in that some of the solutions we tried were a good fit for the context in which we found ourselves operating. It's important to notice that underlying the many questions arising from the specifics of our situation, our fundamental questions did not change. That is, how can we make distinctive contributions toward connecting scholars in our field with each other, with the resources they need for their research, and with audiences who should know more about the history of science, technology, and medicine. Those fundamental questions did not change. Our answers changed, and implementing those answers required making changes in how we run our organization. At the risk of getting Paul in trouble for inviting me, I don't think these examples from the consortium's experience answer the question of what new institutional structures organizations need in the digital age. They might, however, help to uncover how different answers from different institutions who have different goals and are working with different constituencies having their own interests and capacities and are working under different conditions, how we might find the answers are for these different institutions. And it's all too frequent the case that it's not true that if you build it, they will come. Many of us have CDs or DVDs that contain the practically unreadable contents of projects that had little or no impact. I have one. It cost $2 million many years ago. I'm pretty sure I have it. I'm not sure where it is. But if we understand our goals, and we know why the world needs our work, it's very likely that there are online technologies that might increase the likelihood of our achieving those goals. I want to finish the story about the consortium becoming an online organization by telling you about one of our working groups. It's a working group on reproductive health histories, which is very active and a very interesting group. It's run by 4 young scholars who are very tech-savvy, internet-savvy, and media-savvy. They finished their first year of meetings, which was the 23-24 academic year, and they found a way to improve our programs, which, if implemented, would help them achieve their goals better, their goals for their working group better than just by doing what we do. And I think we should try to follow their lead. It's going to be expensive, and it's going to take a lot of organization, but in a few years, we're going to try to follow their lead. And what they did for the very last session of the year was they organized for their group an in-meeting workshop. Thank you.
So I think we have a little bit of time still, if that's right. It struck me as you both were speaking that the organizational models that you have, namely a federally funded institute, essentially at NIH and the consortium, may not be easily adoptable by many of the people that are attending here or online. And so I thought it might be useful to try to get you to think about what your own experiences might suggest regarding responses. And there were 2 things that came up in Jeremy Green's talk that I thought might lead to that. One was I was struck by, and I wrote it down here, engagement of other audiences beyond the physician as you think about your user community. Thought I had it right in front of me. Is it on? Yeah. Okay. And therefore rethinking the authors, the audiences, and the goals of medical histories. What does this notion of generalizing beyond our traditional audiences imply about potential rethinking of organizational models? Have either of you thought about that?
I think there's 2 things. There's a project, the Perseus project at Tufts, which a long time ago, in the mid-90s, was digitizing classic texts in Latin and Greek and putting them online. And what they discovered, and they had language analysis tools, and what they discovered was that there were scholars using their work for scholarly research, but there were a lot of young students using them to write term papers. And so putting things online can open the material for uses we never imagined, just like opening our working groups open to topics that I would have never imagined. And I think that's one thing that can happen. But the other thing is that we have lost or failed to engage with a battle about the cultural value of what we already do, as if though it's not enough for Jeremy Green to write the books that he writes using the collections. And if we get 1,000-fold or 1,000,000-fold access to collections, we're not going to get 1,000-fold and 1,000,000-fold increase in works like Jeremy Green does. Might be a little bit increase, but I think it's worth talking about how we can make clear to the people around us in our milieu, in our context, in our culture, the value of the few people who do a few bits of work that are of extremely high value. And that's a discussion that no one institution or no one person can do, but it's something we need to start doing as a community of scholars and librarians.
So I guess I would attempt to answer the question by pointing out that, the National Library of Medicine is a U.S. federally funded agency, like I described, and we are a resource for the public. So what do we mean by that? We mean by that we are there fundamentally for researchers of all disciplines, not just historians. We are there for high school students who are looking for History Day projects. We are there for members of the medical community in every discipline that is, from physicians to occupational therapists to physical therapy, whatever. And I'm kind of dodging the question by saying that we speak to all these audiences, but we do. And we have moved into an era of needing to be more open with our collections so that we are attentive to anyone from anywhere, no matter what their discipline. They should be able to access the collections they're looking for, the data they're looking for, with as unencumbered as possible. Now, I understand there's a whole technological issue here of how you make that happen. And I totally respect those who are behind, have that technical expertise. I do not. That's why I work collaboratively at the library with many who have that. But I think the library has reached a new era of being open and being being integral to this open access movement and open science movement so that it can provide this information to whomever, wherever. And if there are demonstrated uses of collections that move the needle in biomedical research or advance a particular argument in historiography or win a high school student a national history award, that's great. And we are attentive to those stories. And we try to know about them, we try to document them, and we carry them forward in our reporting so that we can demonstrate how people used our collection and for what purpose. So there are granular instances that we point out beyond how many people accessed a digital collection. And that's a data point. But we have to be able to unpack that data point to know what did they do, how did they do it, where did they publish, who did they touch in their research and teaching, and have they come back to the library to use our collections further, or have they inspired a student to come to the library? And that could either come through our customer support, it could be an email to me or any of my colleagues. So, in terms of demonstrated, what I try to do in my talk is try to bring forward some hallmarks in this ecosystem that we're all facing and try to suggest some steps that I think we're all taking. We've heard this from the previous presentations, but what degrees of collaboration are there available for us to work together? And it's going to differ from institution to institution. There is no one right answer to this. It does require collaboration in the way that the consortium has demonstrated so beautifully. So
we had one comment earlier today from one of your colleagues when we were talking about ideas for making available historical materials that, it would be different if we had the money. And that's from a federal institution that's funded through the government. I think many of the medical historical libraries can't turn to the government. They turn to their own institutions, if they're like in medical schools or other health science schools. They turn to philanthropy. But many are looking for other areas, other models that would allow them to bring in resources from other mechanisms. New business models of some sort, prioritization of issues like AI and how that might attract new funding. So I'm just curious to what extent, because we were asked to think about new organizational models, you could, and it's not going to be NLM obviously, but for the institutions that are represented by many of the attendees here, what are the kinds of institutional models that might allow us to think differently about how to get the resources that are necessary to maintain the services that we offer to our user communities in order to expand our user communities accordingly? Do you have anything to suggest about that?
In my narrow experience, being in the digital age has changed very little. I don't have a lot to compare it with, but there's not been a case where someone said, we're going to fund you because you do technology. It can be an entree. It can be add a little bit of color to the discussions about funding, but it's really the basic project. It's why does the world need what we do, whether we do it online or not, and how does doing it online improve the likelihood of success? And if we can answer those questions, then I think there's not a huge change in how we pursue funding. I'm not aware of how the digital age changes funding per se. Maybe others' experience is different.
Question?
Thank you for the panel. One of the things that transcends government funding or private funding is justification. And you know, and Jeremy was talking about reparative uses of the historical record. And I'm just wondering about generative uses of the historical record. I can think of examples. My colleague at Cornell, Nicholas Sheff, who's been a pioneer in deep brain stimulation, as an undergraduate went to McGill and studied in the Penfield archives and got inspired to do work that, you know, has been, you know, world-changing. I'm writing a biography now of Lewis Thomas, as Jeff knows, going through his papers at Princeton. There are all kinds of scraps of insight and ideas that weren't ready for prime time because the technology hadn't matured. So I'm just wondering, has anyone sought to catalog how the historical record is full of ideas by really smart people that become the impetus? You were just talking about this, like where does it lead? To take credit for that repository of wisdom that's there and it's just waiting to be mined. I think that there's an opportunity here for that. Could any of you, maybe Jeff, could you speak to that?
Sure. So I'll take the credit. No. I'm with the government. I'm just here to help. No. I'll talk about, we have a blog at National Library of Medicine called Circulating Now. And over the course of more than a decade, that blog has published between 500 and 600 posts, each of which represents an author, whether it's a patron of one discipline or another, or a volunteer intern, or one of our library associates. And I call this blog a chorus of voices of individuals who, through their own writing, have testified to how they have valued the diversity of collections at the National Library of Medicine. Now, I can't think of one instance as wonderful as what you've described in terms of your colleague who was at McGill, but this is a constellation of individuals that when you look at them individually and as a constellation, they demonstrate engagement with collections in their own world, whether it's for historical research or anthropological research or journalism or legal studies. And these are the stories of the people who use our collections. And it's just maybe 500 or 600 people, but that's a measurable thing. To me, that's an impactful thing. And to your point about, you know, a project that could better document impact and agency and influence, that's a wonderful idea. But I throw that out as an example. And I just will also add that my colleague Beth Mullen and I are working on an edited collection of posts drawn from our blog in an open access book that's going to be published by Virginia Tech Publishing later this year, to kind of bring the blog, what we call, it's called for Circulating Now full circle, to bring it full circle into the open access ecosystem, to contribute back to the research. So you'll hear about that in the future. But that's how I'd answer the question, Joe. Of course.
Thank you all. Let's thank our panelists.